So Ross Dellinger, biggest newsbreaker in the sport right now, particularly about these big picture items, right? All the big picture stuff that's going on in college football. He put out a tweet about private equity, or in this case, actually private capital. And I'm not saying that linking it to the Big 12 is the best thing in the world. I'm not saying that this is something you should love. I fully understand knee-jerk reactions of anybody who wants to categorically reject this coming into the sport. I think there's a good argument to be made that it's a very bad thing. And listen, it is all just a sign of the times. It is very much all just a sign of the times and a symptom of the real disease that is going on in college football right now. But I do understand it. Well, I don't love it. I do understand it, why this is here. And there's a key difference between liking it and understanding it that I will outline for you as we go on. But first, let's just have you see the Dellinger tweet here. Share my screen so you can see this. This was back on Thursday. Big 12 presidents and ADs today reviewed bids from 3 finalists in the league's pursuit of a capital partner. Sources tell Yahoo Sports. Firms are proposing to infuse millions to schools. Redbird Capital has emerged as the leader. So Capital, again, pay close attention there. Capital, Redbird Capital. Unrelated to the Big 12, capital firms have spent more than a year meeting with school and conference administrators to push cash infusions with interest rates in the 10 to 15% range. So he's not reporting that this is necessarily the numbers for the Big 12, but you can imagine, based on his past reporting from last year, this would be something that could come in the 10 to 15% range. 15 to 20% is something we heard when this was first reported back in June about the Big 12. So you can keep that number in mind too. And then this is a key distinction too. This is a capital proposal, not equity. So we'll get into this report with CVC, which was a private equity company. They're not a part of the group of finalists. That deal fell apart, which does not surprise me because at the time, when all that was going around, that sure is what it sounded like just from people I had talked with at Big 12 Media Days and just asking around a little bit. It did not seem like there was enough support for going all in with private equity at that point in time. So that's what we're looking at. That's what we're looking at right now from Dellinger. Now, I mentioned that story back in June, right? This is not the first time that you guys are all hearing of this. So you may be asking like, okay, John, what's new about this now? What's the deal? Well, as I said, this is a separate deal. The distinction is it is private capital, not private equity. So like equity, you would think of more actually owning like a piece of the conference, whereas private capital, more like a loan that you're going to have to pay back, obviously, with interest. So back to June, here is what that CVC Partners deal that was being discussed looked like. It was a cash infusion of $800 million to $1 billion from Luxembourg-based CVC Capital Partners in exchange for a 15 to 20% stake in the league. A portion of the money would go directly to the 16 conference members. The partnership would give the conference access to their investment services. So CVC was a private equity giant. They managed over $200 billion in investments. Man, must be nice. And they met with the league at the spring meetings in Dallas. So when that came out, that was a really, really jarring story. Not only because of just the general idea and what people think of private equity, which would be, kind of a pump and dump, like come in, strip all the parts that you possibly can, get as much money as you can out of that, and then just leave the entity for dead, more or less, on the side of the road. That's what people think when they think of private equity, right or wrong. I had a friend email me who has a connection to the private equity world and said, I actually don't really think that way because I've seen it not be that way with somebody he knows very closely that works in that industry. So, but I understand why a lot of people did have that reaction. We also just had not heard about it specifically linked to a conference before that. It had been linked to a school. Like at that point, it was sort of associated with Florida State and their pursuit of trying to get out of the ACC. And in their pursuit of getting out of the ACC, it was like, hey, if we're going to have to pay 9-figure amounts of money to actually get out of the grant of rights and be able to do this thing, well, private equity / private capital could really help us. And I think at the time people were looking at that, well, yeah, that's a little bit reckless. Like you guys are trying to do something crazy. That's not very fiscally responsible. And then it was like, hey, well, the Big 12's doing it. And then after the Big 12 did it, Tony Petitti in the Big Ten kind of slammed it. This is one of the really funny things to look back on now. It was not that long ago in October. Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey, commissioners of the Big Ten and the SEC, respectively, they had this like joint press conference after their two leagues had met. And this is what they said on private equity. This is a Petitti. This is even just Petitti. This isn't Sankey. This is Tony Petitti himself. Quote, I have yet to see a single thing in any plan that I've learned details about that contains things we couldn't do ourselves and our A4 colleagues as well. At the end of the day, there's a strong commitment that you have the ability to do all this ourselves. Okay. No private equity help. We can do all this ourselves. Some of that is about, private equity being linked to some of the Super League proposals, right? So it's all kind of meshed together in that quote, I suppose, if you want to give him a little bit more credit. But it sure didn't seem like they were putting much stock in private equity being a road that they wanted to go down. Well, then in January, November, December, January, 3 months later, we've got this. The Big Ten Conference is taking preliminary bids from private equity firms, despite past comments from Commissioner Tony Petitti questioning the upside of involving institutional capital in college sports. Now, these are all things that en route to getting a communications degree from good old Kansas State University, I did not learn very much about. I am not a finance guy. I don't know a whole lot about private equity, private capital, and the like. So I am just going off of what we learned the first time that all this was going on, what has been told to me, right? But if you're sitting there asking yourself, okay, like, I get that everybody wants money now, but what's the specific plan here? Why would you want to do this? Why is this back on the table in some form or fashion? I think it is pretty easy to break down. The idea is this, like everybody in college athletics, and this is not just in the Big 12, by the way, again, as evidenced by the fact the Big 10 appears to be looking into a similar sort of solution here. Everybody is trying to find $20 million, what's it going to be? 21 and a half, maybe the first revenue sharing number, around $20 million extra per year that they're going to need to pay the student athletes in the revenue sharing era of college athletics, which as long as all the I's get dotted, the T's get crossed on the House settlement, that's what it's going to be. Everyone's going to have that. If you want to compete at the top of the sport, you got to have the $20 million. Not an easy thing for athletic directors to just randomly find. Okay. If you need that money, where's it going to come from? It's a lot easier when you're making twice as much on your TV deal if you're the Big 10 or SEC as everybody in the Big 12 or the ACC. Not only that, but they're about to get a lot more money from the college football playoff, where they will more than double their take-home pay per school in the new era of the college football playoff, which starts in 2026. They've got a lot more money. And a lot more money coming in, ways to do this that the Big 12 will not have. If you don't have that $20 million, you're not going to be competitive at the top of the sport. And what that means is you will lose players and you will lose coaches. And it would be basically in that order, right? Like you if you're not able to pay your stars are going to start walking to Big 10 or SEC schools where they can get paid what the top dollar would be there. And then once that starts happening, it's not just that, they might be able to offer your coach more money to go coach there, but the coach is going to look around and be like, hey, this is not a place that I can win at the level that I want to win at. So then you're going to lose your coaches. So if you want to hang on to all these guys that we talk about, Chris Kleiman, Matt Campbell, Lance Leipold, the stud coaches of the league, something that you're going to need to do if you want to hang on to the star players of the league, something that you're going to need to do. And that is have the money, not necessarily have it come via a capital investment, but you need to have the money. If there's not a good way to bring the money in outside of this is the why. Now, as far as like the how, okay, because I did have someone ask me too, well, how does that make sense if you have all this extra money you're going to have to pay every year? And now if you bring in that infusion, the interest rate adds up and then you're going to have to pay an extra 10 or 15, whatever it's going to be, 15 to 20% on top of that. How does that make sense? Basically gambling against your future TV deal, right? You're kind of mortgaging the future against what your next TV deal is going to be. Because where was the nugget about that? Yeah, if you go back to the first story about the failed flirtation with CBC Capital Partners, Dennis Dodd reported a doubling of the Big 12 media rights would put the total value of the league at approximately $5 billion in its next negotiation. That's an over 100% increase in value, and it was deemed as reasonable by a media industry source contacted by CBS Sports. Now, if you want to look at me and say, John, that seems very apple pie in the sky, high hopes kind of stuff, I'd say that does seem fair. Like right now, it was like $2.3 billion, I think, total for the Big 12 TV deal right now. So you are talking about more than 100% increase there. That does seem like a lot. Now, TV rights generally do go up. You are hoping that as a conference, you invest in yourself, you stay competitive, and that trend continues. Obviously, it's going to increase. That's the bet that you would be making. And I don't know how exactly it would work. This is where, again, I'm in over my head when I'm talking about bringing in private capital to invest in your league or your entity, business, whatever it might be. I don't know how it works. If like, are you paying 15 to 20% every year? Can you wait and say, hey, wait until this new TV deal kicks in, then we'll get you the money? I don't know. I don't know how it works, but I think that's basically the idea. Hey, we've got this $20 million bill to pay. That's what it takes to be competitive at the top of the sport. If we invest that, we will stay competitive. Look at what Arizona State did to Texas last year. We can stay relatively competitive with the top end of the sport. Everybody's happy. We'll make more money on the next TV deal, and then we can pay off that investment at that point in time. That's the idea here with the investment in the conference. Now, I mean, again, a lot of risk here. Definitely a risky proposition. Seems like it's where the sport is going, whether you like it or not. So you may just have to do it anyway. Like if the Big Ten is going to do it, well, then they're getting even further ahead of you. Like you're going to have to do it just to maintain the current gap that's there between you and the Big Ten, right? So it may just be something that happens anyway, and the Big 12 is not really any kind of risk trendsetter here. But once you do this and bring this into the, like, okay, what happens if the TV bubble does burst and suddenly your TV deal's not worth any more the next time around you get to it? Well, you're in some big trouble. You got a pretty big check to write there that you're not prepared to cash, and then things could just be in complete disarray. And when you talk about it from a Big 12 perspective, now think about, I have mentioned this multiple times, how every game seems more stressful, and like the end results of games on a game in, game out basis and year in, year out basis in the current landscape where conference realignment is always on the table and you're thinking about fighting for your life in the sport. Now, why don't you add the layer of like the conference is fighting for its life, and that if you start losing any game against the SEC, like TCU Georgia style, maybe that hurts your TV value, the overall interest in the conference, and then you're going to be really up you know what creek, man. Like if you now can't generate that extra money from the next TV deal because your team's been taking it on the chin too much, you've got a real problem. So you've got to make sure that you stay competitive then. It is a very much, people talk about betting on yourself. It is very much a bet on yourself kind of move. That's the risk. And it will make watching these games probably even more stressful for all of us. And this, I'm not saying any of this doesn't suck. It absolutely sucks that we have to have these like life and death stakes attached to the sport. These existential threats happening all over the place, but it is just kind of the deal. It is just kind of where we are at right now. So I will just say, if you are very much knee-jerk reaction against this, just understand that what you're essentially then in favor of is basically just taking everybody that's not Big Ten or SEC doing a completely different thing that will not be as popular, will not get as much attention, but you are doing your own thing, and there's something to be said for that. And I know there's a portion of you that definitely feel that way. I'm just outlining that is the reality here. That is the reality. If you were going to do that, you'd be playing a different type of game than everybody else. So yeah, I agree, Chris. Definitely tough situation for sure.